hello, hello, and hello. It is 2023. In January, we talked about this. We talked about doing a word study. So we are starting. The first word of the year for 2023 is nevertheless. Now, if you want to figure out, oh my gosh, why she picked this word, how she came up with all this, it's a combination of a lot of things. So go watch the old YouTube on that. It was in January 2023. It was about, doing background stuff on a word study. So we are here now dealing with traveling through the word for 2023. And again, I am reading through the Bible in a year. And so I'm on some interesting things right now. So nevertheless is a great word for what I just finished reading not long ago. So let's talk about where we are. So how many times do you find it in the Bible? Well, 215 if you count like all the different versions that I use to find it. Okay. So probably not 215 in one version, but when you use lots of different versions, lots of different translations, then you put them all together and you get 215. 172 in the Old Testament and 43 in the New. So let's kind of talk about the power of nevertheless. Nonetheless, that's funny. So it talks about in the English vocabulary, there are not many words that can like change. Like we know that when we say but, B-U-T, like it shifts some things. It makes you think about what happened in the front. I'm about to do something different. Nevertheless, is kind of like that word, but a little more powerful because it can change the entire context of a sentence, a conversation, or even the outcome of a situation. So we're going to talk about different text, how it's changed, different things, dialogues, and all kinds of things. And so there's a lot of power in this word, nevertheless. So let's look at what we have here. In the Old Testament, the original Hebrew meaning, it talked about a ceasing, an end, a finality. Okay? When you go over to the New Testament, which is your Greek, you see it in Luke, you see it in Mark, you see nevertheless being used for after negative sentences, or it's transitioning into something new. Like you have this, but now I'm turning into something new. And then with Mark, you have it used as an opposition to concession. Okay? So this basically means that the speaker is saying, I don't concede. I don't yield to circumstance. Those things have to submit to my nevertheless. Okay? So you submit what's happening, but you don't concede to it. You submit it all to a nevertheless, and then we talk about what happens on the other end. Okay? And then finally, if you look at the American Heritage Dictionary, it says nevertheless simply means in spite of all that, or in spite of knowing. And so let's talk about what we want to do today. Talk about how it can change us individually, how it can change a church body, like all the strength that lies in it. So one way we can do it is, this is Old Testament, you can change from a positive to a negative. So if you read the story in Numbers, chapter 13, 23 through 33, you find where there's a nevertheless changes something from a positive to a negative. So there are 12 spies. They're sent over to, check out the land of Canaan, the land that has been promised to the children of Israel. Okay? So there are 12 going over there. They're going to spy out the land. And they come back. They all go to the same place. Now, mind you, they've all seen the miracles of God on this side. They all go look at the land of Canaan, the land that God promised them on the other side. All right? And what you have is 10 come back with one perspective, 2 with a different one. Now, the 10, which when you look at 10 out of 12, that's the majority. What they did was they witnessed God's promises. Remember, Red Sea, they did all that. Water, manna, quail, all the things. They witnessed God's promise. Like every time he said he was going to do something, he did it. But they couldn't trust that he would protect them when they got over to the new land. Okay? You got to think about this. Like it says, God did not lead them to this point just to leave them wishing, ooh, if only we could trust that God was going to protect us. Okay, so remember, 85% or the majority of the spies, they're nevertheless changed a positive. We saw and know what God can do into a negative, but we can't conquer these people like God said we could. Okay, so they're looking at the land saying, man, there's some great things over there for us. But in spite of that, we can't do it. Okay, it became an end, a ceasing, a finality. Okay, because what happened was what God wanted to do for that group of people, he didn't do. Remember, at that point, God was like, you know what? Got it. I'm going to let you guys walk in a circle for about 40 years. They're going to allow some generations to die off. So it was a ceasing for them, a finality for them. It's like, it's over. You had an opportunity, but it ceased when you allowed your nevertheless to turn the positive promise I gave you into a negative, I can't trust that God can protect us. And so you got to think about yourself. What are you doing? Are you allowing what you see with your eyes or what your emotions feel to make you turn positives into negative? You got to think about that in your own life. Okay? So that's one story. Then we have another story. Okay? We have the story of a negative to a positive. Okay? This story is found in Luke 5. Okay? This is the recording of the miracle of the fishes. Okay? Simon Peter is just finished fishing. He's fished all night. He has not caught a thing. All right. So now he's there. He's cleaning his nets. It's a whole ordeal to do this whole thing. And so he's cleaning his nets. And, Simon Peter, remember, was a fisherman. He knew what he was doing. He knew the best time to fish. He knew where to throw the net. I mean, he was an expert at this. So he knew what he was doing. But then Jesus came along and Jesus says, Simon Peter, throw your net on this side. Now, Simon Peter had the same option that the children of Israel had. He could tell Jesus about all the things, all the reasons why he should not throw that net over there. And although he did tell him a few things, guess what he said? Nevertheless, he said, we tried this. But Simon Peter was like, nevertheless, because you said it, I'll do it. So remember, Simon Peter had not great luck. But he trusted Jesus. Now the children of Israel, a little opposite. They had all kinds of miracles, but they couldn't trust his protection. Simon Peter is sitting there thinking, I fished all night. I mean, I've never not caught fish all night. But you know what? I have faith. I trust God. I trust the master. And so nevertheless, was a switching on this one. All right? Simon Peter said, we worked all night, haven't caught a thing. But in spite of all that, this is what we're going to do. So this, nevertheless, in the Greek form, it marked a transition to something new. Because Simon Peter was a fisherman fishing for fish. Simon Peter turned into a fisherman fishing for men. Because at that point, Simon Peter was like, Jesus, I'm going to follow you. So he had a transition to something new. Okay, so we got the negative to the positive, the positive to the negative, and then that was the children of Israel, and then we had the negative to a positive. Simon Peter didn't catch anything, all of a sudden caught more fish than he ever imagined in his life, had to have people come and help him, the whole thing. So now we're going to do a carnal to the spiritual, and this is found in the book of Mark, chapter 14. And so we learned about the power of nevertheless that changes an entire world. Okay, so we had a group of people, children of Israel. Okay, it's like a local body of Christ. We have an individual, Peter and fishing. And so now we're about to change the entire world. All right, because remember, Jesus Christ was God wrapped in humanity. All right, he knew what awaited him in the remaining hours of his life on earth. His human nature didn't want to, it just was like, I don't want to do this because he's human. He was 100% human and God, remember, all at the same time. He understood the pain, the emptiness, the agony, all that was facing him in that garden. Okay? And he knew the scriptures because remember, he is the word, the living word. For the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross. Okay? There was an internal crucifixion that he had to go through in the garden before he ever allowed Judas to come and meet him with a kiss. He had to go through this because guess what? When we go through it, he understands what we're going through. His human nature didn't want to go through the agony of the Roman crucifixion. His human nature didn't want to suffer the loss of his friends when he needed them the most. His human nature saw any other means to accomplish God's will. But because of the power of a nevertheless, guess what happens? You and I both get to enjoy the presence of a holy God. It was this power of the nevertheless that allowed us to come face to face with an amazing grace. Nevertheless was like a bridge that brought us to where we are now. Okay? So here Jesus he's weeping bitter tears of opposition to what the world truly needed. It needed a savior. Okay? Which he was fine with as Jesus. But in the human part of him, that was different. All right? He's praying to his Father. Is there any other way? But in spite of what I want, there it is. In spite of what I want. His in spite of what I want gave us what we needed. The opportunity for grace and mercy. He surrendered his will for us to have the power of being connected back, having access to the presence of God. Okay? So, although, when you think of nevertheless, you're like, well, you could have did grace. You could have did faith, hope, love. I mean, you could have did one of the pretty words, joy. Nevertheless, not in the 10 Commandments. They don't have it in the Beatitudes. Like, really, Jackie, that's the one? But that's a word that Jesus spoke that changed all of our lives. His nevertheless shifted the entire world. Like, it shifted us into a place where we have access to something we never would have had access to. And so, even though you may be going through some things, you can find some comfort in the word nevertheless. And even when you don't want to do something, you can find comfort in your nevertheless. It is that word that changes so much. So much. So, It's a little section right here about 2 Corinthians 3:14 through 16. But their minds were blinded. A veil lies on their heart. Nevertheless, when one turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away. So it talks about how people before they, accept Christ, they're living in darkness of spiritual realities. They don't get it. They don't understand. Okay? They're trying to find peace and direction, which are impossible without God. I mean, you may have some form of peace, some manly form of peace, but it's not the peace of God, the one that surpasses understanding. Okay? So everything that you're going to do eventually is going to lead to a sense of emptiness, which is why we need a nevertheless. Because when we get that nevertheless, it's like, nevertheless, not my will, but yours. I can remove the veil. All right? Nevertheless, when we turn toward the Lord, the veil of darkness gets taken away. So we can speak a nevertheless that can not only change our lives, but change the lives of those around us as well. Okay? And so, nevertheless becomes like a healing word. It can change a dialogue, a situation, ultimately an entire world, from a positive to a negative. All right? From a negative to a positive. It also can become a point of surrender and submission. All right? And so, the power of nevertheless, you hold it in your own hands as to what sort of difference you can allow it to make in your life. It's up to you. So here are just a few more things. Now, when you think about the word nevertheless, there are 4 Hebrew Aramaic results that are found in the Old Testament, and then there are 6 found in the New. They are the Greek results. And so when you look at this, you can see like this right here, that's Strong's number. That's the Hebrew word right there. Okay, that's transliterated right there, so you can kind of see, kind of pronounce the Hebrew part of it. But then look at what they have here. Like, look at the words that are associated with it. So when you think about like this first Strong's H61 right here, when you think about this, nevertheless, look at the other words that are around it. But, verily, indeed. Okay? Then this one right here, surely, is added to this one. Certainly is added to this one. Look up this one. Howbeit, notwithstanding, scarce, surely, it's one of my favorite words. Truly, verily, wherefore. These are words that are associated, like I can use nevertheless, or I can use some of these words, depending on where it was found in the Bible. This same word right here. It either meant this or it meant this. It meant this or it meant this. Okay? And then when you go down to the Greek, the New Testament Greek, here's what you get. So you get these are the 6 right here. Look at what I see down here. Save. Look at this one. Yea. Therefore. Howbeit again. Nay. Though it be, but. There's a lot going on here. Okay? So sometimes, like when you see a word and you say, wonder what other words are associated with that. This is how you use your Lexi Concordance right there. Because I want to see what other words, when I look at this word right here, in this like this Strong's number here, and I start looking at the Greek for it. In one verse, it may be this, but in another verse, you see this. So that's why it pays to kind of go all the way back and then look at the context of it. Not just every time I see it, it means this thing. No, not at all. And so, with that said, what you have down here is, there are lots of verses, okay, that goes with it. These are some of the Old Testament ones, all right? Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he is also flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. So when I look at that verse right there, that's Old Testament. So I would go back up here and I would say, ooh, which one of these nevertheless? I could see which strong is it, Strong's number 61, 389, 403, or 1297. And then I can come over here and see which one is it mostly associated with. See how that works? All right. And if I went all the way down to the New Testament, I could do the same. It's way down there at the end. So, anyway, let's go back to the beginning up here. And let's talk about how excited we are for the power of nevertheless. Nevertheless. So, until our next word for the month of March, thank you for traveling through the word with me in 2023, one word at a time. Bye.